The tide was low enough that morning to expose the rib bones of the old pier my wife and I rebuilt the summer before she got sick. A gull worried a crab in the rack line, and the air smelled like salt, cedar, and yesterday's rain. I was oiling the porch rail when my son's car turned down the lane, sunlight flashing off the windshield like a signal flare. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. Evan waved from the driver's seat, hopeful as a boy, and the woman beside him, polished hair, smooth smile, adjusted her sunglasses to study my house the way a buyer studies a property line. The Hale place is plain by rich folks' standards. Cedar shingles grayed by weather, a deep porch, windows that open to the sea's moods. But everything you can't see carries the weight. Triple block joists, hurricane straps, pilings sunk to refusal. My late wife, Marion, used to pat the kitchen wall and say, "We built this with truth, Dougie. Truth in wood has a sound." She was right. Tap the beam, and the house answers back. "Dad," Evan said as he hopped out. He's 32 now, tall like his mother, with the same habit of smiling before he's sure how the news will land. "You look good." "I look like a man who lost a fight with a can of tung oil," I said, and hugged him anyway. Over his shoulder the woman approached, hand already extended, diamond the size of a hailstone, eyes the color of a winter sky that doesn't promise anything. "Douglas," she said, "I'm Sabrina Vale." Her handshake was light, deliberate. I've met admirals with that touch, people who save their grip for the moment it matters. She stepped past us to face the house, inhaled like an appraiser, then smiled again, softer this time, for Evan's benefit. "It's charming," she said. "Charming keeps its roof in a nor'easter," I answered. Evan laughed, eager to bridge us. "Sabrina grew up inland. She's still learning the difference between decoration and design." "Design," Sabrina said, testing the word, "is why I asked to stop here first." We went inside through the porch door, the one that sticks when the humidity rises. The foyer photographs caught the morning. Marion in her red raincoat, Evan at 6 missing his front teeth, me in dress blues beside the submarine that consumed 6 years of our lives. I watched Sabrina's eyes move. Family, family, service, family, looking for the seam where a person can pull. "I brought coffee," Evan said, holding up a tray, "from that bakery you like in town." "Bless the bakery," I said, and set the cups by the sink. Sabrina drifted to the kitchen window and stared at the line where the river meets the bay. I know that look. The horizon sells 1,000 fantasies a day. "Evan says your wife designed this house with you," she spoke. "To the glass, not to me." "She drew the first grid on butcher paper," I said. "I figured the spans. She picked the light. I picked the fastening." "Partnership," she said, as if filing it. "Partnership," I agreed. Evan squeezed her shoulder. "Wait till you see the studio, Bree. Mom used to paint in there every morning." Sabrina's smile sharpened a millimeter at the nickname. She likes how it sounds on him, and then smoothed into something tender. "I'd love that." We toured. The studio smelled faintly of linseed and old winter sun. Marion's easel still stood in the corner where the light breaks but doesn't glare. I keep it there because grief is a housemate you don't evict. You just learn which doors it prefers. "Your mother was talented," Sabrina said, studying the watercolors I'd framed and hung after the funeral. "Prize ribbons," she added, touching the faded rosettes on a peg, reading their dates the way some people read fortune cookies. "She was more stubborn than talented," I said. "Stubbornness is a kind of talent that pays out if you wait long enough." Back in the kitchen, Evan found the old tin of tea Marion loved and insisted on brewing a pot, as if that small ritual could summon blessing. Sabrina stood at the threshold with the poise of a woman who rehearses entrances. When she spoke next, the words came wrapped in lace. "Douglas, may I ask you something a little forward?" "Forward is a course and a quality," I said. "Which one do you need?" She laughed like a bell. "The quality, I think." She glanced at Evan, then squared to me. We're looking at wedding venues this weekend. We reserved the conservatory at the Meridian, but it doesn't feel like Evan, or you, or his mother. A tender pause. This house does. Evan's face glowed with the idea before he remembered to check mine. My heart pulled two ways at once, the selfish tug of memory and the invitation to keep the house in the story of my son's life. It's his family home, I said carefully. If he wants to say vows under this roof, he's welcome. With some shoring, in case your friends dance like sailors. She clasped her hands, eyes bright. That's wonderful. There's another thought, and I hope it doesn't offend. Another glance to Evan, who nodded, not yet understanding the line he'd set his foot across. Evan and I have a plan for the next 5 years. We want to start our life with something that lasts. Property is a legacy, of course, but it's also signal. We were wondering if you'd consider passing the house down early as your wedding gift. So it's not just a venue, but a foundation. There are moments when the room itself takes a breath. This was one of them. The kettle clicked off. The gulls outside shouted over a bait ball. My fingers found the nick in the oak table where Marion once dropped a carving knife and laughed at herself for aiming wrong. Early, I repeated. My voice came out even. In me, the ballast tanks flooded, as we used to say. Ship settling to a depth where pressure and silence can steady a man. Evan rushed to fill the space. We'd keep everything, Dad. The studio, the porch, all of it. Bree loves it. And we'd handle taxes, maintenance, roof, the works. We want you here as long as you want to be. It would just make things simpler on paper. Simpler on paper. Men have drowned on that phrase. Sabrina stepped closer, palms open in sincerity. I know it's a big ask. Families today plan differently. We can compensate, of course. I have an inheritance coming next quarter when my aunt's estate closes. And inheritance, I said. It wasn't a question, but she answered as if it asked one. She raised me like a second mother, Sabrina said softly. We were very close. From where? I asked. She blinked. Pardon? Where did she raise you? Michigan, she said with the confidence of a woman who understands that most men won't check the wind speed against the wave height before sailing. Spring Lake area. Pretty country, I said. Good boatyards. Her smile ticked again. Yes, the boats. Evan's hand found hers. Dad, we're not trying to pressure you. It just feels right, like bringing Mom forward with us instead of leaving her behind. That was a clean strike, whether he meant it that way or not. I let the blow land. Some strikes teach you something true. I do want Marion forward. I want her in every morning light that washes my son's future. Walk with me, I said. Both of you. We went out to the porch, down the steps, across the crushed shells to the edge where grass remembers dune. The tide had turned. On the far bank, a boy threw a stick for a dog that pretended not to know the rules. I pointed to the pilings. Those look simple, I said. A post in mud. But a piling's a conversation with forces that don't care how you feel. You find refusal. Refusal is when the earth says, enough, no more. You sit there. If you cheat, if you take the first maybe for a yes, the whole structure carries that lie. Every winter reminds you. Sabrina gazed at the water like a woman listening to poetry. That's beautiful, Douglas. It's not beautiful, it's instruction. I turned to them. I promised your mother I'd never let this house carry a lie. Evan's shoulders dropped a fraction. We're not lying. I didn't say you were. But paper can lie while people tell themselves they're only organizing. Sabrina folded her arms slowly, as if testing the weight of a different posture. I don't understand what makes an early transfer a lie. Timing is an honesty, too, I said. It tells the truth about ripeness. Some fruit falls because it's ready. Some because a hand shook the branch. She held my eyes several seconds longer than politeness requires. I've stared down men with steel under them who broke sooner. Then she smiled and gentled her voice. We want to honor you, Douglas. We want to honor Marion. Making this house the seed of our family is the most respectful thing we can imagine. Respectful? A word like varnish. Makes anything shine if you layer it thick. The wind shifted a degree colder. From inside, the phone rang. The old landline with a bell that sounds like 1993. I let it ring. Anyone who needs me will call again. I'll think, I said. Thinking's free. Talking is, too. Paper costs. Evan exhaled. Relief and disappointment braided together. That's fair. We're meeting a planner at the Meridian at 2, Sabrina said. We can swing back after? Maybe with sample contracts? Purely illustrative. Bring cake samples, I said. Purely illustrative. She laughed because that was the correct response. Evan laughed because I did. They said their goodbyes with the kind of brightness people use to push through fog. When the car turned up the lane and vanished behind the cedar screen, I sat on the porch step and listened to the house breathe. Marion, I said without moving my mouth, if you have a wind to spare, send it. A small thing then. In the foyer, a frame that never counts without cause shifted a hair. The photograph inside is the one I reach for when grief climbs the stairs. Marion on launch day wearing the ridiculous paper captain's hat Evan made in kindergarten, her smile the exact middle distance between pride and mischief. It was straight when we toured. It hung crooked now, a fraction of an inch. Don't make more of it than it is, I told myself. Then I made more of it than it was, because sometimes that's how truth knocks. I put the kettle back on and called Evan to make sure the visit's edges hadn't cut him. He answered on the second ring, happy, a little breathless. Sabrina wanted to stop by the jeweler to resize the band. Could we talk later? We traded I love yous, a good sound to bank. After tea, I opened the ledger where I keep the house's bones. Survey, title, easements, the letter from the inspector who swore he'd never seen hurricane clips that clean. The file is dull to anyone who hasn't felt a roof. Try to leave while you're still under it. To me, it's scripture. I check the title chain because habit is its own comfort. All square, all quiet. Then I did the thing I do when the water looks glassy but the barometer nags. I walked. The neighbor, Helen Pierce, was trimming her rosemary, spring already rehearsing beneath winter's coat. She lifted her glove and peered over her readers. Your boy brought someone lovely, she called. Pretty as a picture. Eyes like a fox. Foxes are pretty, I said. And they'll teach you about chickens, she said, and went back to her herbs. I laughed, kept walking, and felt my pulse settle. Suspicion isn't a virtue, but ignoring the tug that kept you alive 50 feet below the Pacific isn't wise either. On the way home, I cut by the town clerk's annex to drop off the storm door latch I promised Joe I'd fix. The clerk, bless her, talks like a radio that doesn't shut off. Gossip is the county's second crop. I don't eavesdrop. I do listen to weather. Back at the house, I straightened the tilted frame and went to the studio. The light had turned serious. Winter's late morning. Honest, unflattering. I pulled down Marion's favorite brush, the one she wore to a nub, and stood there like a man who doesn't paint pretending he might. I put it back carefully. Some tools live where the hand that knew them left them. In the corner, the old answering machine's red light blinked. We keep a landline because storms eat towers, and because some voices deserve a wire. I pressed play. First message, the bank reminding me to sign the annual notice about escrow, routine. Second, Peter Lawson, my friend from the service who went to law school when I chose wrenches. Doug, he said, got your Christmas card late. Stop by this week. I've got a bottle from that distillery you like, and I want to hear you lie about how young you feel. Third, a clipped professional voice asking to confirm an appointment. Friday at 11 for Ms. Vale, Vale & Hart Event Design, to tour the Hale property and review logistics. I stood listening to that one twice. We hadn't made any appointment. I saved the message, wrote the number on a pad, and stared at it until the digits arranged themselves like a weather map. It could be innocent. The world runs on people scheduling things on others' behalf. It could also be a hand on a branch. I called the number. A cheerful receptionist answered. Vale & Hart Events. How may I direct your call? "This is Douglas Hale returning a message about a site visit," I said. "Oh, perfect," she chirped. "Ms. Vale wanted to confirm the Friday walkthrough at 11. We'll have our staging vendor and the tenting subcontractor present. Our coastal package recommends 40 by 80 clear span, but we can adjust if your lawn grade can take stakes." "Who requested the visit?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Ms. Vale," she said brightly. "She said she's authorized on the property." A gull shrieked outside, the kind that sounds like laughter if you're far from home. I kept my voice level. "We'll need to reschedule. Nothing goes on that lawn without the owner present." A beat. "Of course," she said. "I'll note that." I thanked her, hung up, and stood very still until the kettle clicked again because I'd set it to boil without noticing. Then I poured water I didn't want and watched steam unspool like a thought you haven't chased yet, because you're afraid you'll catch it. When Evan called that evening, voice bright again, full of plans, full of tomorrow, I told him the same truth I would have told him when he was 10 and wanted to build a raft out of pallets and hope. "Son," I said, "bring Sabrina back on Saturday. We'll walk the property. I'll show you what a foundation sounds like when it's telling the truth." He laughed. "Easy." "Okay, Dad." After we hung up, the house exhaled the way a hull does when it shifts from tide to slack. I turned off lights, touched the door frames Marion used to bless with her palm, and went to bed with the window cracked to let the river speak. Somewhere around 3, I woke to that peculiar quiet that feels like a hand drawn across a mouth. I lay there, listening. Then I rose, went to the porch, and breathed the dark until it gave up a scent I knew from the machine shop. Hot metal cooling. Not on my property. Somewhere near, somewhere busy. In the morning, I found a shoe print at the side path where the rosemary kisses the shell. Fresh, narrow, a woman's flat with a tread I could draw from memory. I looked toward town and then toward the house, which stood the way it always stands. Honest, square, ready for the day's weather. "Okay," I said to the cedar posts, "we'll do this with light. And if light wasn't enough, we'd do it with the kind of pressure that makes a piling set forever. Because nothing that tries to steal a home built on truth gets to keep the lie it rode in on. Not while I'm here to hear the knock." Morning sunlight cut through the salt-streaked window, turning the kitchen into a watercolor of gold and gray. The kettle hissed its warning, and the smell of coffee mixed with the faint tang of ocean air sneaking through the cracked door. I'd been awake since before dawn, thinking about that voicemail, the one scheduling a site inspection for a wedding I'd never agreed to host. My gut told me the problem wasn't the event planner. It was the person behind the request. When you've spent 30 years building hulls that travel under pressure, you learn a simple truth. It's never the noise that breaks you. It's the silence that hides the crack. I poured my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and glanced toward the hallway. The photo wall, my map of time, looked off. At first, I couldn't tell what had changed. Then my eyes caught it. The small gap between 2 frames. Marion's photograph from our wedding day, gone. The other pictures still hung where they should. Our anniversary on the deck, Evan's high school graduation, Marion laughing in the garden with a daisy crown he'd made for her. But the wedding photo, her in that simple linen dress, holding a handful of wild roses, was missing. I knew I hadn't moved it, and I knew when it disappeared, sometime between yesterday morning's tour and last night's phone call. I set the mug down slowly. The ceramic hit wood with a dull thud. "Sabrina Vale," I said under my breath. It wasn't accusation yet, just hypothesis. But in engineering, hypothesis is where the truth begins. I checked the house. Nothing else was disturbed. No drawers open. No footprints on the rug. Even the door latch I'd left, slightly turned, was now flush, as if closed with care. Whoever took that photo didn't search. They selected. Why that one? Because it showed the origin, the true ownership, the love that built every nail in these walls. I went to the porch and looked toward the road. Tire impressions cut through the gravel where Evan's car had parked yesterday. A faint drag line crossed one of the grooves, heels turning toward the house, then back again. I crouched, brushing a hand over the imprint. Small shoe, narrow heel, Sabrina's. I didn't curse. I didn't even frown. I just memorized it. Inside, I checked my phone. 2 missed texts from Evan. Evan, Dad, thanks for yesterday. Bree was nervous but really likes you. Evan, she wants to come by Friday before the planner meeting. Says she forgot something at the house. Forgot something? The pieces clicked together the way bulkheads do before a storm. Tight, undeniable. That photograph wasn't a keepsake. It was leverage. I'd seen the way she'd studied the photo wall, like someone memorizing a map. Now she had one image missing, the one where my signature appeared faintly on the lower mat. A custom frame I'd made years ago. A perfect match for the estate deed I'd found her looking at online last night. Yes, I'd checked. After the planner call, I looked up her company name, Vale and Hart Event Design. The LLC existed, but the registered address belonged to a co-working suite with a dozen temporary tenants, and her email domain was newer than the paint on my porch. Still, I couldn't accuse her, not yet. Suspicion without proof is like a ship without ballast. It tips easy and sinks faster. So I did what I've always done before a deep dive. Check my instruments. I called Peter Lawson around 9. His voice came over the line, calm and gruff, the same tone he used to use in storm briefings. Morning, Doug. You sound like a man who's already skipped to Act 3 of something. You still keep contacts at the county registry? I do. What kind of trouble are we talking? The kind that wears perfume and calls inheritance a plan, he grunted. You want me to run a name? 2, actually. Sabrina Vale. And cross-check Vale and Hart Event Design. Give me a few hours. I'll call you back. Appreciate it. I hung up and spent the rest of the morning sanding the porch railing again. There's peace in repetition. The motion of work steadies the storm inside. But every scrape of sandpaper whispered the same question. What did she want with that photo? By noon, Helen Pierce stopped by with a basket of blueberry muffins. She's been my neighbor for 20 years and can smell worry faster than smoke. You've been quiet since yesterday, she said, placing the basket on the railing. That woman got under your skin, didn't she? She got in the house, I said. Helen's eyebrows lifted. Well, that's not hard, Doug. Your door's open more than a church on Sunday. She took something. Anything worth calling the sheriff about? Just a picture. Helen tilted her head. Sometimes a picture's worth more than the frame it's in. I smiled faintly. That's what worries me. Peter called at 2:17 p.m. sharp. You were right to ask, he said without preamble. Vale and Hart isn't registered under her name. It's under a shell management firm in Phoenix. No tax filings in the last 2 quarters. But the kicker, yours, Sabrina Vale, used to be Sabrina Hartwell, changed her name 2 years ago after a civil suit in Michigan. Michigan, I murmured. Spring Lake. Exactly. Embezzlement through a non-profit that collected donations for flood victims. Never convicted, but the firm dissolved. She moved states 6 months later. I thanked him, but my pulse had already gone tight. That night, Evan called again, cheerful and distracted. He talked about tux fittings and honeymoon flights while I listened, memorizing the cadence of a man who still believed the sea was calm. When he paused, I said, Son, do you still have Mom's wedding album? Sure. Why? Check if all the photos are there, particularly the first one, her by the dock holding the roses. There was a shuffle, then the sound of him flipping through pages. Weird. It's gone. The sleeve's empty. I closed my eyes. That's fine. Just making sure I wasn't losing track? He laughed lightly. You never lose track, Dad. Try to remember that. After the call, I sat in the dark, watching the light from the dock reflect on the water. My father used to say, theft doesn't always start with taking. Sometimes it starts with pretending to belong. The more I replayed Sabrina's smile, the more I recognized it, the confidence of someone rehearsed in pretending. By midnight, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered anyway. A soft voice. Mr. Hale? This is Laura from Vale and Hart. Ms. Vale asked me to confirm tomorrow's walkthrough. She said you approved it personally. I looked at the clock, 12:03 a.m. She was mistaken, I said. No one steps foot on this property without me present. If she tries, I'll consider it trespassing. Silence on the other end, then understood. Click. I sat there, heart steady, anger cooling into calculation. It wasn't time to confront her. Not yet. When you're testing a hull, you don't strike the plate. You press, measure, wait. The fracture reveals itself if you're patient. Tomorrow, I'd make sure she walked right into her own crack. The next morning came in damp and gray. Fog. Hanging so low it felt like the ocean had climbed into the yard to rest. The gulls were quiet. Even the river seemed to move slower, the kind of day when time loses its edge. I made my usual inspection walk around the house, habit from years at sea. You check your vessel before you sail, even if you're only crossing calm water. The cedar siding was sound, shutters tight, the porch dry. Only one thing had changed, a faint crease in the mailbox flag where someone had forced it open after dark. Inside was a white envelope, no stamp, no return address. I took it to the kitchen, slid it open carefully with my pocket knife, and pulled out 2 sheets. The first was a wedding venue proposal from Vail and Hart Event Design, printed on glossy paper. The second was a draft contract, unsigned, transferring full usage rights of the Hale property for private ceremony and exclusive residency following event completion. Exclusive residency. The words rolled through my head like ballast shifting in a storm. I poured another coffee, set the papers flat on the table, and took a long look at the handwriting in the margin. Doug agreed verbally, finalized by Friday. My hand tightened on the mug. I hadn't agreed to anything. That wasn't just presumption. It was forgery. At 10, I drove to town. The fog lifted in sheets as I hit the main road, revealing the docks where the trawlers slept. My truck's heater whined, a familiar complaint. Peter Lawson's law office sat above the old hardware store. The brass letters on his door still read, Lawson and Brigg, attorneys at law, though Brigg had died 5 years back. Peter looked up from his desk as I entered. He didn't need to ask why I was there. The papers in my hand told the story. Hell of a morning, huh? He said. Fog's the only thing keeping me from seeing too much, I replied, laying the envelope down. He adjusted his glasses, read the first sheet, then the second. His eyebrows rose. They drafted this under your name? With my supposed verbal consent. He set the papers down and exhaled slowly. Doug, this isn't just audacious. It's coordinated. Whoever's behind it knows exactly how inheritance law works. You think she's done this before? He nodded once. That Michigan case I mentioned. She claimed verbal approval from her employer to transfer nonprofit funds. The trick buys her time. People hesitate to call a liar when a signature isn't on the page yet. Until it's too late, I said. Exactly. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. You want me to send a cease and desist? Not yet, I said. I want her to believe I'm still thinking. People like her get careless when they think they've already won. Peter smiled thinly. You're planning something. I'm preparing, I said. Naval difference. On the drive home, I stopped at the post office. The clerk, Denise, was sorting letters in the back. She knows everyone in the county by their handwriting. Morning, Doug, she called. Your boy's fiancée came in yesterday, dropped off some documents for next day delivery. I stepped closer to the counter. What kind of documents? She shrugged. Didn't open them, obviously, but she said they were legal confirmations for the wedding, headed to the Meridian in a bank in Boston. Boston. That wasn't the sound of love. That was the sound of logistics. Thanks, Denise, I said, leaving before she could ask questions. At home, I placed the envelope beside my ledger. 2 sets of truth, one built over years, one fabricated overnight. I opened Marion's old filing cabinet and pulled the original deed. Her handwriting filled the margins. Small notes like, remember to add drainage line, or ask Doug about paint sample 3. Marion's touch was everywhere in this place. Even the way she looped the letter M on her initials had rhythm. The forger's pen couldn't mimic that. It could only counterfeit the paper, not the soul. Still, I needed proof. So I called the county clerk. "Records office," a woman answered. "This is Douglas Hale. I'd like to confirm if any document requests or property title inquiries were filed under my parcel number this week." She paused, typing. "Give me a second." "Yes, actually. 2 preliminary record pulls were made under your lot yesterday afternoon by someone named Vale and Hart Management. Was a release form signed?" "No, just copies requested. Says pending owner confirmation." "Thank you," I said, keeping my tone even. But inside, something solid clicked into place, a pattern forming like a tide chart. She was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before anyone pushed back. That evening, Evan called again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey, Dad," he said, voice upbeat. "Bree wanted me to remind you about the Friday walkthrough. She's so excited. Says she has big plans for the ceremony space." "I'll bet she does," I said. "She showed me the design renderings last night," he continued. "They're incredible. Candles, lights along the porch, floral arch on the bluff. She really wants it to be perfect." "Does she?" "Dad," he sighed, "I know you're protective, but she means well." "I'm sure she does. Tell me something. Did she mention any paperwork?" He hesitated. "Paperwork? For the venue, or the property?" She said something about a reservation contract. But it's just for the event, right?" "Of course," I said. "Just wanted to be sure." He relaxed instantly. "You had me worried there." "Don't be," I said softly. "Enjoy your evening, son." When we hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. Evan's voice had always been my compass. Hearing how easily it bent under someone else's current hurt, worse than any storm I'd ever faced. By midnight, the fog had returned. I sat at the desk, light low, flipping through Marion's journals. The pages smelled faintly of sea salt and oil paint. In one entry, written years before she passed, she'd penned something I'd never noticed until now. "If truth ever leaves this house, follow the paper. It'll tell you who carried it out." I looked again at the forged contract. Paper. She was right, as always. The paper trail would tell me who was moving behind my back, so I opened my laptop and began setting a quiet snare. A simple email, drafted to Sabrina Vale with the subject line, "Property Consideration Proposal." Inside, I wrote only one line. "Let's discuss the early transfer on Friday. Bring your documents." Then I saved it in drafts, scheduled to send at sunrise. The trap wasn't ready yet, but by the time the tide came back in, I would know which way her current flowed. There are mornings when the past feels louder than the present, when the creak of the porch board, the hum of the fridge, and the gull's cry outside all seem to be saying her name. That morning was one of them. The draft email to Sabrina had gone out at dawn, just as planned. I watched it leave my outbox like a message in a bottle, tossed into a current I couldn't see. She'd bite. I knew her type, the kind who confuses silence with surrender. I poured coffee, black and bitter, and opened the window. The river below was calm, fog skimming its surface like smoke over glass. Marion would have said it looked like the world was thinking before speaking. She had lines like that, soft, simple, and truer than anything written in law books. It had been 12 years since she passed, but every screw and hinge in this house still remembered her hands. Some mornings I almost caught her humming in the hallway, the old habit she had when mixing paint. That hum, that was her heartbeat turned to sound. I spent the next hour going through the attic, not looking for ghosts, but something closer to guidance. The attic air smelled of pine, varnish, and old summers. I pulled out one of Marion's storage trunks and knelt beside it. The brass latches clicked open with the sound of memory giving way. Inside were her sketchbooks, thick with color swatches, brush notes, and taped Polaroids of sunlight angles across this very house. Between the pages, I found a small recorder, an old silver dictaphone, the kind she used when sketching ideas aloud. There was a sticky note on it, written in her looping hand. For Doug, in case I'm gone before the paint dries. My chest tightened. I sat down right there on the floor and pressed play. The tape crackled, and then her voice filled the room. Soft, warm, real enough to make my hand tremble. Doug, if you're hearing this, I probably didn't finish what I started. A faint laugh. You always told me buildings speak. Maybe they do. Maybe people do too if we leave enough of ourselves behind. Promise me something, sailor. Don't let anyone rewrite what we built. Not on paper, not in memory. The tape clicked, static, then silence. I sat for a long time, the recorder heavy in my hand. It wasn't sentimentality that got me. It was how clearly she'd known me, how she'd already seen the kind of fight I'd one day face. That voice steadied me, reminded me what this was about. Not revenge, not pride, just truth, and keeping her name clean on the beam that held this roof up. When I went downstairs, the answering machine light was blinking again. I pressed play. Mr. Hale, this is Kara from the Meridian Conservatory. Ms. Vale asked us to confirm your venue transfer. Congratulations, sir. The property will make a stunning residence for the couple. Please call if there's any delay with final deed verification. I stopped breathing for a moment. Venue transfer. Deed verification. She wasn't waiting for Friday. She was accelerating. That recorder still sat in my pocket, Marion's voice inside it, like a compass needle pointing home. I took it out, played the last line again. Don't let anyone rewrite what we built. Not a chance, I said aloud. I called Peter. Doug? She's moving faster. How fast? She's using my property as collateral for a venue contract. Likely wants to secure a bank guarantee before Friday. Smart, in a criminal sort of way. She thinks I'm signing over everything voluntarily. Peter paused. You ready to make this official? Not yet. Let's make it educational first. He chuckled. You still like your lessons to hurt a little. They remember better that way. By late afternoon, Sabrina replied to my email. Sabrina Vale. Douglas, thank you for the note. I'm so relieved you're seeing things our way. I'll bring the revised documents Friday morning. You'll love the changes. They simplify everything. She attached a PDF. I downloaded it. Title, Preliminary Gift Transfer, Hale Estate. Within the document, my name appeared 4 times, twice spelled correctly, twice misspelled Douglas Hale. An amateur mistake, but a telling one. It meant she wasn't the drafter. Someone else was feeding her templates. I checked the document properties, created in Boston by T. Rowaneski, a lawyer on the payroll, or someone she conned. Either way, a lead. I printed the pages and folded them into an envelope labeled Friday. That night, I drove out to the bluff above the harbor, Marion's favorite spot. The wind came hard off the Atlantic, cold enough to bite. I sat on the bench she'd carved her initials into, pressed the recorder's play button again, and listened to her hum. The melody had no words, just that old tune she'd made up while painting. Steady, circular, rising, and falling like the tide. The rhythm calmed my mind, slowed my breathing. The hum ended, replaced by her voice once more. Doug, you always fix things before they break. That's your curse and your grace. But some things need to crack open before the light can get in. Don't patch everything. Some people need to reveal themselves. Her message faded into static, and that's when it hit me. I'd been trying to fix this situation quietly, sanding edges, smoothing roughness. But Marion was right. Some lies needed to split wide open in daylight in front of witnesses. That would be my strategy from here on out. Back home, I spent the rest of the night setting up the evidence. I scanned Sabrina's forged papers, saved them to a drive, and copied the metadata logs. Then I began drafting a legal decoy, a document that looked like the final property transfer, but contained a hidden clause that voided the agreement under fraud, enforceable immediately upon her signature. Peter would finalize it tomorrow. It wasn't revenge, It was insurance. By the time the clock struck midnight, the fog was rolling in again, dense, deliberate, and whispering around the windows. I stood there listening, half expecting Marion's voice to rise out of it. Instead, I heard a car engine idling near the drive. I stepped onto the porch and saw headlights flicker once before cutting out. The sound of soft footsteps on gravel. Whoever it was, they didn't come closer. They just stood there, long enough for me to see the glint of a phone screen. And then the darkness swallowed them again. Sabrina, checking her prize before claiming it. I smiled to myself, slow and cold. Friday, then, I murmured. Let's finish the painting you started, Marion. The fog lifted overnight. Morning sunlight came in clean, sharp, and cold. The kind of light that doesn't soften anything, just exposes it. I woke early, made black coffee, and sat on the porch with Marion's recorder in my pocket. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the groan of old wood stretching with the sun. I had 3 tasks for the day: verify the lawyer who drafted Sabrina's document, find someone who'd known her before Evan, and make sure my own paper trap was airtight. Peter was handling the third. The first 2 were mine. By 9, I was on the phone with a friend in the Coast Guard, retired now, but still knew how to find information that wasn't meant to be public. I gave him the name, T. Rowan, Eskist, Boston. He called back within the hour. "Your Rowan's real," he said, "but his firm shut down last year. Fraud investigation pending. Name's been showing up on off-market legal templates floating around online. Somebody's using it like a ghostwriter for scams." "Meaning anyone can make fake papers with a stolen name?" "Exactly." That confirmed it. Sabrina's document wasn't crafted by a professional. It was patched together by someone playing lawyer, and she'd gotten sloppy. That left one lead: her past. The Michigan Trail had bothered me ever since Peter mentioned it. People don't just change names, they change skins when there's something to bury. I went back to my laptop, opened a search field, and entered every combination I could think of. Sabrina Hartwell flood relief, Spring Lake embezzlement, Vale and Hart nonprofit collapse. It didn't take long before a headline popped up. Local charity director resigns amid missing funds allegation. Hartwell Foundation closes. June 14th, 2019. Grand Haven Tribune. There she was. Same eyes, same confident half-smile, only the last name different. Below the article, a single quote from a staff member. She told us she'd found an investor to replace the lost funds. Then she disappeared. The source's name was listed as R. Delgado, Ruth Delgado. Peter's earlier note matched. She'd been one of Sabrina's colleagues, and for the first time, I had a name worth dialing. It took 3 tries before someone answered. A woman's voice, careful, a little weary. "Hello? Miss Delgado?" "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name's Douglas Hale. I believe you once worked with a woman named Sabrina Hartwell. She goes by Sabrina Vale now." Silence stretched. "You're not a journalist, are you?" "No, ma'am. I'm a father. She's engaged to my son." Another silence, longer this time. Then a sharp breath. "Oh, God. I take it that's not a good sign." "She's at it again," Ruth muttered. "I knew she would be." I kept my tone even. "Tell me what you know." Over the next 10 minutes, she unfolded a story that sounded too rehearsed to be anything but true. Sabrina had joined their non-profit in Michigan 4 years earlier, presenting herself as a wealthy volunteer with corporate contacts. She'd quickly charmed donors, then quietly redirected funds meant for rebuilding flood-damaged homes. When discrepancies surfaced, she claimed it was a paperwork glitch and promised her aunt's inheritance would cover it. The inheritance never existed. The board filed charges, but Sabrina vanished before the court date. By the time Ruth tracked her, the trail went cold. New city, new name, new story. Ruth's voice cracked when she said, "She's smart, Mr. Hale. Smarter than people think. She doesn't steal money. She steals lives. She finds men with something she wants: property, reputation, access, and convinces them it's love. When she's done, she leaves with everything that isn't nailed down. She's after my house, I said quietly. Ruth sighed. Then she's already chosen the next man. That's how she moves on. I wrote down everything she said, thanked her, and hung up. My hand trembled slightly. Not from fear, from fury restrained too long. The worst part wasn't her deceit. It was how carefully she'd studied my son, found his soft spots, and weaponized them. I needed air. I walked down to the dock, where the tide was turning. A heron stood ankle-deep in the shallows, patient as prayer. The air smelled of salt and pine resin. When I reached the end of the dock, I pulled out Marion's recorder and pressed play again. "Doug," her voice said, "remember, not everyone who looks steady is anchored. Some people float until they find a place to tie their rope. Make sure it's not your dock." I smiled faintly. "I'm trying, love. I'm trying." That afternoon, Peter came by with a folder tucked under his arm. "Draft's done," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "The fake transfer looks perfect. The clause is buried deep. Section 7B, fine print. The moment she signs, it triggers a notarized nullification. She won't see it coming." "Good." I poured him coffee. "Friday can't come soon enough." He eyed the notes spread across my table. Newspaper clippings, Ruth's transcript, the forged contract. "You sure you want to handle this alone? We could bring the sheriff in now." I shook my head. "No law can prove what's in someone's heart. She needs to expose herself." Peter sighed. "You always did believe in poetic justice." "I believe in showing people the sound of their own lies," I said. "It echoes louder than any verdict." By evening, I'd organized every piece of evidence into labeled folders. Forgery witness, metadata, legal nullification. My desk looked like a courtroom waiting to happen. Outside, the sun dipped low, staining the water orange. A shadow moved by the gate, small, swift. I stepped out, but by the time I reached the porch, it was gone. Just a scrap of paper caught on the fence post. I pulled it free. It was a wedding planner brochure, veil and heart signature events. On the back, scribbled in pen, "He won't know what hit him." For a moment, I stood there, feeling the chill rise through my shoes. Then I smiled, not out of fear, but because she'd just written her own confession. I folded the paper, slid it into the evidence folder, and whispered, "Thank you, Sabrina. You just saved me the trouble of proving intent." That night, I sat by the fire and replayed Marion's tape one more time. The same line over and over. "Make sure it's not your dock." I could almost feel her beside me, the warmth of her hand on mine. Friday would be her storm, not mine. I've always believed a lie leaves fingerprints, even when gloves are worn. By Friday morning, I had a dozen of Sabrina's prints, just not the kind you lift with powder. Her traces were in ink margins, digital metadata, and the way she said "we" when she meant me. The morning came bright and deceptive. Clear sky after days of fog, the sort of day that lures fishermen to sea before the wind turns. I brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, then sat at the table with the forged contract. Section 7B stared back like a loaded chamber. Peter's clause was flawless. The instant she signed, the paper voided itself under misrepresentation of identity or intent. The law might be slow, but language moves fast when you write it right. I checked my phone. No message from Evan yet. He was supposed to bring Sabrina at 11. The air in the house felt tight, heavy with waiting. At 10:15, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the quiet. I saw Evan's car pull in, silver, freshly washed, shining like optimism. Sabrina stepped out first, all smiles and practiced warmth, a white folder in one hand and a bouquet of lilies in the other. The scent hit before her words did. "Douglas," she called, "we brought flowers for the house." "The house thanks you," I said, opening the screen door. Evan looked proud, oblivious to the theater unfolding around him. "Bree wanted to go over everything before we meet the planner." "Of course," I said. Come in." Inside, the air felt smaller. Sabrina's perfume, something sharp, citrus and iron, filled the kitchen. She placed the lilies in Marion's vase, the one etched with our initials. D&M 1978. My jaw tightened. She sat across from me, folder ready. Evan took the seat beside her, smiling like a man certain he was building the future. "I hope you don't mind," she began, "but I brought the updated transfer paperwork. We simplified the language so it's easier for everyone." She slid the papers across the table, her manicured nails tapping once on the top page. I didn't look down right away. I watched her instead. The faint pulse at her temple, the way her smile paused before settling back into place, tells of someone playing confidence instead of feeling it. Evan broke the tension. "Dad, Bree's been working nonstop on this. I think you'll really like what she's done." I nodded. "I'm sure I will." I opened the folder. Same structure, same formatting, but one detail stood out. Near the end, beneath my printed name, a signature line already bore a faint impression, as though traced from another page. A dry run. Someone had practiced signing my name. My hand moved over it slowly, deliberately. "Neat draft," I said. "Oh, thank you," she said sweetly. "It'll save time later. I even included a preliminary acknowledgement from your lawyer friend. Mr. Lawson, right?" I looked up sharply. "You've spoken to Peter?" She smiled wider. "Oh, we've exchanged a few emails. He's been very helpful." That was a lie. Peter would have told me. I kept my expression neutral. "He does enjoy helping people." "He said something about a trust signing," she continued. "It sounded so official." "Yes," I said slowly. "Official is good." I slid her document aside and pulled out my own envelope, the decoy transfer, the one Peter and I prepared. I made some adjustments myself, just a few small things to keep everything clear. Her eyes flickered, a quick darting motion she couldn't control, the hunter realizing the prey brought bait. Why don't we go over this together?" I said, spreading my version open. For the next 10 minutes, we talked through each section. I spoke calmly, every word measured, every sentence deliberately mundane. Evan nodded along, only half listening, caught between pride and impatience. Sabrina pretended to follow, but her eyes were scanning, calculating risk and gain. When we reached the signature page, I set down my pen and said, "Sabrina, you've worked hard on this. I think it's only fair you sign first, to acknowledge receipt of the property terms." Her brows lifted. "Me?" "Formality," I said. "You know how lawyers love their paper trails." For the first time, her hand hesitated. "Shouldn't Evan sign with you?" I smiled. "He will, but it's your document, not his. Just to keep things tidy." Evan looked confused but stayed silent. Sabrina finally exhaled. "Of course." She took the pen, poised it over the line, and pressed down. The instant the nib touched paper, I felt it, the quiet click of a trap springing shut. She signed her full name, Sabrina Vale. I watched, expression calm. Then I turned the document around, tapped the page, and said gently, "You just acknowledged a transfer under fraudulent representation, Ms. Hartwell." Her face froze. "What?" I slid the recorder from my pocket, not Marion's this time, but the digital one Peter insisted I carry. I pressed play. From its speaker came her own voice from an earlier voicemail, one she'd left by accident when the line hadn't fully disconnected. "He won't know what hit him. Once the house is in my name, we can refinance and move. Evan won't even blink." Evan went pale. "Bree, what is that?" she stammered. "That's not me. Someone—" I cut her off. "And here," I said, producing the planner brochure she'd left behind, her handwriting clear across the back. "He won't know what hit him." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Evan looked between us, confusion, disbelief, hurt, all fighting for control. "Tell me this isn't true." Sabrina's mask cracked. "It's not like that, Evan. Your father, he misunderstood. We were trying to make things easier." I stood slowly. "You mean easier to forge?" She shot to her feet, face twisting. You old fool. You think you're clever. I was trying to save him. You live in the past. This house, that dead woman, your stupid principles. You don't deserve. Stop, Evan whispered. Just stop. She looked at him, panic seeping into her voice. Evan, I love you. He's twisting it. But the damage was done. Her tone had shifted, the practiced sweetness gone, replaced by something sharp and desperate. Evan turned toward me, eyes full of the boy I'd raised, the one who finally saw through the fog. Dad, is it all true? I nodded once. Every word, and the proofs in your fiancée's handwriting, her emails, and her voice. Sabrina snatched her purse, muttering, You'll regret this, before storming out the door. The screen slammed behind her. Evan stayed seated, staring at the papers. I didn't see it, he said. I didn't want to. I put a hand on his shoulder. That's how liars survive, son. They live in the spaces people leave between wanting and truth. He nodded slowly, eyes wet but steady. What happens now? I looked out the window. The road was empty. Now we let her show the world who she really is. That evening, Peter came by to collect the signed documents. I told him what happened. He whistled low. She actually signed? She did. That clause triggered the nullification automatically, he said. It's legal armor now. She can't touch your property. I leaned back, exhausted. She'll try something else. People like her don't quit when cornered. They scramble. Peter nodded. Then we'll be ready. When he left, I stood on the porch again. The lilies Sabrina brought had started to wilt. I tossed them into the river, one by one, until the vase was empty. From the pocket of my coat, Marion's recorder hummed to life. I hadn't even pressed play. Static first, then her soft voice whispering from years ago. When you hear the wind change, Doug, that's just the sea reminding you. You're still anchored. The wind picked up, cool and certain, and for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. Tomorrow would bring its storm, but I'd already weathered worse. The morning after Sabrina stormed out, the sky turned hard and silver. The wind came in from the east, steady, cold, and sharp enough to make the shutters hum. It felt like the house itself was waiting, breath held between calm and consequence. I've lived long enough to know storms don't announce themselves with thunder. They arrive quietly through pressure. The barometer of truth had been dropping for weeks. Today, it would hit bottom. After what happened yesterday, I expected silence. Instead, Sabrina called at 8:10 a.m. sharp. Douglas, she said, her tone smooth again, the edge hidden under sugar. We had a misunderstanding. I may have overreacted. May have? I shouldn't have raised my voice, she continued, pretending composure. You took me by surprise. I thought you'd already discussed the transfer with Evan. I hadn't. Well, I'm glad we cleared the air. I want to make things right. For Evan's sake. Can we meet later today? Just the two of us? I looked at the caller ID, noting the number. Not her usual cell, a burner. That told me what I needed to know. She wasn't coming to apologize. She was trying to negotiate terms before her story collapsed. Of course, I said. How about 3 o'clock, my place? Perfect, she said. Thank you, Douglas. You won't regret this. Oh, I already have, I said softly, but she'd already hung up. Peter arrived half an hour later, trench coat dusted with salt from the bay wind. You look like a man setting bait, he said. I am, I replied. She wants to meet. 3 o'clock, he smiled. Predictable. She'll either plead or threaten. Both good for us. We went over the documents again, making sure every clause was tight. The decoy contract was already voided by her signature yesterday, but now we had something more powerful, a confession by behavior. Peter had also arranged for 2 witnesses, his paralegal, Claire, and a deputy clerk from the county office, to arrive just before the meeting. They'd sit quietly in the dining room, present but invisible behind the pocket door. I don't want her ambushed, I said. Just seen. Understood, Peter said. We're not the hunters here. We're the mirrors. At 2:45, the first car arrived, Peter's. then the witnesses who slipped in discreetly. By the time the clock hit 3, the house smelled faintly of cedar and tension. I'd laid out coffee cups on the table. One for me, one for her, untouched. The forged contract sat between them along with her own forged draft. The handwriting mismatch circled in red. When the crunch of tires on gravel came, I didn't move. I just watched through the window as Sabrina stepped out. Calm, poised, in a navy dress too formal for apology. She walked up the porch like she owned the planks. "Douglas," she said as I opened the door, "thank you for giving me this chance." "Come in," I said. "Coffee's hot." She smiled faintly. "I don't think I'll need it." We sat across from each other. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was crowded. With her lies, my patience, and everything unspoken between a deceiver and the man who refuses to be one. Finally, she broke first. "I think we started off wrong," she said. "I wanted to surprise Evan, make the property transition a wedding gift from you, not a burden on him. But when I tried to handle the paperwork myself, it looked presumptuous." "It looked criminal," I said evenly. Her eyes flashed, then softened again. "You're still angry. I understand. I crossed a line. But I can fix it, if you'll let me." "Go on." She leaned forward slightly, voice lowering. "I've already spoken to a financial contact in Boston. If you transfer partial ownership now, we can refinance at a higher equity value, clear your son's student debts, and—" I held up a hand. "Sabrina," she stopped. "You're making the mistake most con artists make," I said quietly. "You think the other person's greed will blind them." Her lips parted. "Excuse me." I slid her brochure across the table, the one with "He won't know what hit him" scrawled on the back. Then I set down the flash drive beside it. Her face lost color. "I found your emails," I said. "The drafts you sent from the Vale and Hart account to a certain Mr. Rowan, or whoever's still using his name." Her hands twitched in her lap. "You went through my files?" "No, you sent them to mine." Her mouth opened to argue, but I continued calm and steady. "You've been inside my home, my son's trust, my life. You stole a photograph of my wife, forged my signature, and tried to sell the lie as love. You nearly succeeded. That takes talent." She straightened, regaining composure. "If you think this conversation will scare me, you're mistaken. Evan loves me. He'll never believe you." At that, the pocket door behind her slid open. Peter stepped out first, followed by the deputy clerk. Both silent, both witnesses. Sabrina turned, freezing. Peter's voice was smooth as polished brass. "Ms. Vale, you've already admitted to drafting these documents, yes?" No, "Then let the record show," he said, clicking his pen once. "This meeting is being documented as part of an ongoing fraud investigation, with your consent established by participation." Her eyes darted toward me. "You planned this?" I nodded. "I told you I'd give you a chance to speak. You chose to confess." The silence that followed stretched long enough for the clock to tick 4 times. Then she laughed, brittle and wild. "You think you've beaten me. You think your papers will matter when Evan finds out you trapped me? He'll hate you." "Maybe," I said, "but at least he'll hate the truth, not the lie." She stared at me for a long moment, and then her confidence cracked completely. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, voice echoing through the porch. "You'll regret this, old man. You don't know who you're dealing with." The front door slammed so hard the lilies on the table shook. Peter exhaled. "You do love your dramatics, Doug." "I prefer symmetry," I said. "She started it here. She ended it here." After everyone left, I walked down to the dock. The water was calm, glassy, pretending nothing had happened. I pulled Marion's recorder from my pocket and let it play. Her voice filled the quiet. "Doug, remember, the loudest storms are the ones that end in stillness." I smiled. "You'd have liked today, love." She heard the thunder. The sun sank low, cutting a bright path across the water. I stood there until the light turned copper, thinking about Evan, about the conversation that still had to come. It would hurt, but truth always hurts before it heals. And tonight, I could finally breathe without bracing for another lie. The ocean looked calm that afternoon, but I've learned calm water lies. It hides the rip current just below. The invitations had already gone out weeks earlier. Engagement celebration at Echo Bay Conservatory, Saturday 6 p.m. Evan had mailed them himself, proud as any son announcing good fortune. I hadn't planned to attend after yesterday's debacle, but Peter insisted. "You can't win this kind of war by staying home," he said. "Truth needs witnesses." So I pressed my jacket, dusted the salt off my shoes, and drove into town. The conservatory sat on a hill overlooking the bay, white glass panels, polished floors, and too much light for people with secrets. Inside, the guests glimmered in silk and smiles, sipping champagne. The air smelled like perfume and expensive nerves. Evan spotted me first. "Dad, you came!" He looked tired but relieved. His tie wasn't straight, his eyes red-rimmed. Grief does that, even before it knows its name. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. He glanced toward the far end of the hall, where Sabrina was holding court, laughing, radiant, not a trace of guilt visible. She wore white again, not bridal white, but close enough to announce ownership. She saw me and paused just long enough to gather herself before striding over. "Douglas," she said sweetly, "I'm so glad you came. I didn't want things between us to be strained." "Then you shouldn't have forged my name," I said quietly. Her smile never broke. "Let's not ruin Evan's night." "Oh, we won't," I said. "I came to make sure it's memorable." The speeches started at sunset. Evan stood on the small stage, microphone in hand, thanking everyone for coming. Sabrina hovered behind him, glowing under the lights, when he turned to me and said, "And to my father, for supporting us even through everything." I knew the moment had come. Peter caught my eye from across the room and gave the slightest nod. I stepped forward. "Mind if I say a few words, son?" Evan looked uncertain, but Sabrina clapped politely. "Of course, please." I walked up to the podium, the floorboards echoing like a drumbeat. "When my wife Marion and I built our home," I began, "we did it with our own hands. Every beam, every nail, every line on the blueprint told the truth about who we were." People smiled, expecting nostalgia. I let the silence grow a little longer before continuing. "Truth is a strange thing," I said. "It doesn't shout. It just waits, quietly, until a lie gets tired of standing." I opened the folder Peter had placed on the table beside me. Inside were two papers, Sabrina's forged draft and my decoy contract, both signed. "Some of you may not know that my son's fiancée is a very organized woman," I said, voice calm, steady. "She even prepared legal documents for me, anticipating my generosity." A low murmur swept the room. Sabrina stiffened. I held up the first sheet. "This one's hers, a fake transfer of my home. A fine effort, except she spelled my name two different ways." Nervous laughter flickered among the guests. "And this," I continued, lifting the second page, "is the document she actually signed, acknowledging fraud under Arizona statute. Witnessed and recorded yesterday afternoon." Peter stepped forward then, producing a small device. "And just so there's no confusion, we have her voice," he said, pressing play. Sabrina's words filled the hall through the speakers. "He won't know what hit him. Once the house is in my name, we can refinance and move." The laughter died. You could feel the air change, like pressure before lightning. Evan turned toward her, face drained of color. "Oh, Bree!" She stumbled forward, hands shaking. That's not. Someone edited." Peter raised a hand. "Audio authenticated this morning by a court-certified technician." She looked at me then, eyes wide with the realization that there was no more ground left to stand on. "You set me up," she hissed. "I let you set yourself up," I said. "I just made sure the lights were on." The room erupted into whispers. Evan backed away from her, one step, then another. She reached out, but he turned aside. "You lied to me?" he said, voice breaking. All of it? Sabrina opened her mouth, then closed it again. No script left. 2 uniformed officers entered quietly through the back. Peter's doing. They didn't cuff her, not yet. They just asked her to come along for questioning about pending fraud allegations. She looked at me once more, eyes blazing. You think this makes you righteous? You ruined your son's life for revenge. I shook my head. No, Sabrina. I just saved what's left of it. After she was escorted out, the conservatory fell silent except for the wind outside. Evan stood there, staring at the floor. Guests began to drift toward the exits, murmuring apologies and disbelief. I waited until it was just the 2 of us. She almost had me, he said finally. I thought I knew her. She's good at making people think that, I said gently. Don't blame yourself. Liars rehearse. Honest people don't. He nodded slowly. What happens now? You rebuild, I said. Same way we built the house. 1 true nail at a time. He tried to smile, but it faltered. And you? I go home. I've got paint to scrape and silence to listen to. We hugged then, quiet and long. When he stepped back, his eyes were wet, but clearer than I'd seen them in months. Outside, the bay shimmered under the moonlight. I walked down to the edge of the water before heading home. The air was cold enough to sting. From my pocket, I took Marion's recorder and pressed play one last time that night. Doug, her voice said softly, if you ever have to stand alone, remember, you're not. The house will hold. I looked back toward the conservatory, lights fading behind me, and smiled. It held, Marion, I said. It held just fine. The wind shifted overnight. You can always tell when a storm has passed, not by the calm, but by the silence that follows it. After the engagement party, I slept for the first time in days without waking at every creak. Still, when morning came, I felt the weight of unfinished business pressing against my ribs. Sabrina Vale, or Hartwell, or whatever name she'd try next, was in custody, at least temporarily. Fraud investigation pending. But law moves slower than truth, and truth had already done its work. Still, Peter insisted on locking the hatch, as he called it. He came by just after breakfast, briefcase in hand. Morning, sailor, he said, his old grin intact. Ready to make this official? Only if it stays quiet, I said. He opened his case and set down a small digital recorder, newer than mine, sleek, professional. This, he said, is what seals the story, the chain of proof. We'll play it once, then archive it with the county attorney. After that, you can finally let the tide take the rest. We sat at the table, same one where Sabrina had once slid her forged papers across, as though she were offering communion. Peter pressed play. First came the background sounds, a faint hum of conversation, the clink of coffee cups, and then Sabrina's voice. He won't know what hit him. Once the house is in my name, we can refinance and move. Evan won't even blink. Her tone was confident, casual. Then another voice entered, a man's. Peter paused the tape. That, he said, is Thomas Rowan, the disbarred attorney she used for templates. He's under federal investigation for identity fraud, the same man who supplied her with those contracts. He pressed play again. Rowan, and you're sure the old man trusts you? Sabrina, please, he's sentimental. All I have to do is smile and mention his dead wife. He's halfway there already. Rowan, once it's signed, we file in Boston, right? Sabrina, exactly. He'll never see it coming. Peter stopped the recorder and leaned back. This was captured from her burner phone. My contact traced the SIM. She'd left it on the table at the conservatory, recording the whole conversation for leverage, until the officer seized it. I exhaled slowly. She recorded her own confession. People like her always do, Peter said. They think they're archiving victories. Turns out they're archiving evidence. We filed the recording with the sheriff that afternoon. Sheriff Miles Grant, a friend from my shipyard days, met us at the office. His handshake was firm, his voice low. Hell of a mess, Doug, he said, "but you handled it better than most." "I didn't handle it," I said. "I just listened." He nodded, playing the tape once more, through his own device, then scribbling notes. When the final words faded, he shut it off. "That'll do," he said. "With this, the state'll move quick. She won't see another shoreline for a while." "Good," Peter said. "The Hales can have some peace." The sheriff looked at me then, serious. "You sure you don't want to press for restitution? She pulled your son in deep." I shook my head. "Money won't fix what she cracked. Let her debt stay moral." On the drive home, Peter said little. We both knew what the silence meant. When trust is betrayed, even justice feels hollow. When we reached my house, he lingered by the porch. "You know," he said, "you could have let the courts do it all. But you chose a quieter route." "I wasn't trying to punish her," I said. "I just wanted to hear my wife's house tell the truth again." He smiled faintly. "Well, it did. Loud and clear." He left then, dust trailing behind his car until it disappeared over the hill. I went inside, made tea, and sat at Marion's old desk. The recorder, hers, not Peter's, still sat where I'd left it. I pressed play, almost out of habit. "Doug," her voice said, soft and sure, "you can't save everyone, but you can save what's honest. That's enough." "Yeah," I whispered, "that's enough." The wind picked up outside, whistling through the shutters. For a moment I thought I heard her laugh in it, not as a ghost, but as memory stitched to sound. Evening settled slow. Evan called around 6. "Dad?" His voice was small, careful. "The sheriff came by. He told me about the recording." "I figured he would," I said. There was a pause. "You knew she was lying, but you still let me see it through." "You wouldn't have believed it otherwise," he breathed out. "You're right." "You angry?" "No," he said after a moment. "I think I'm just embarrassed. And grateful." I smiled. "That's a fair combination." He hesitated. "I don't know how to start over." "Same way we built this house, son. One beam, one day, one truth at a time." He was quiet for a while. Then, "Can I come home for a bit?" The words hit harder than I expected. "You never left, Evan. Door's always open." After we hung up, I sat by the window, watching the tide roll back in. The bay was dark, calm, and endless. The world, it seemed, had started breathing again. On the table lay 2 recorders, one carrying my wife's voice, one carrying the woman who tried to steal her legacy. The difference between them was the distance between love and greed. The sound of truth spoken softly versus lies spoken loud. I picked up Marion's and held it close. "We made it, love. The house is still ours." Then I turned off the light and let the sea do the talking. You never really hear a storm leave. It just grows quieter until you realize you can hear yourself again. That's how the next few weeks felt. A long, slow quiet. No more calls, no more forged letters, no more perfume hanging in the hallway after she left. But the silence wasn't peace. It was aftermath. I kept busy, painted the porch rail, repaired a shutter that had been whining all winter. Sometimes I caught myself listening for the sound of tires on the gravel drive, half expecting her car to appear again, headlights slicing through the pines. But she was gone now, traded designer heels for county-issued shoes. Peter called one morning with the update. "They arraigned her today," he said. "Multiple charges. Fraud, attempted forgery, identity theft. Looks like the Michigan case finally caught up too." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "How's she taking it?" "She's pleading ignorance, of course. Claims she was manipulated by her partner, Rowan, and that she only followed his advice. That woman could teach mirrors how to lie." Peter chuckled softly. "The prosecution has recordings, bank statements, fake IDs, all of it. She's not walking out of this one." "Good," I said. "Maybe she'll finally face something she can't charm." Evan was quiet for days after the hearing. When he finally came by, he looked older, not broken, just changed. The kind of change that comes from learning what you can lose. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome. "You going to keep standing there?" I asked. Or do I have to install a revolving door for lost sons? He smiled weakly. Guess I earned that. Come in. He did. The house seemed to sigh when he crossed the threshold, as if relieved to have him back. We sat at the kitchen table, same seats as always. No papers this time. Just 2 mugs of coffee and a long silence that didn't need words. She pled not guilty, he said finally. Her lawyer said she's the real victim, that you coerced her into signing something she didn't understand. I snorted. Did he mention the audio where she bragged about stealing the house? He did. Said it was taken out of context. We both laughed. A sad, tired laugh that felt more human than anything we'd shared in months. Then Evan's voice turned small again. Dad, I keep asking myself how I didn't see it. Everyone says love is blind, but I think I was just looking at the wrong things. You were raised to believe people meant what they said, I told him. It's not blindness, son, it's trust. The world just gives you reminders when it's time to check your bearings. He nodded, staring at his hands. She's looking at 5 years, maybe more. She'll serve what she earns, I said. The law handles the rest. Weeks passed. The media picked up the story. Engagement scandal at Echo Bay. Fraudulent fiancé exposed by retired engineer. Reporters called, but I never spoke to any of them. Truth doesn't need interviews. It just needs time to breathe. Evan eventually went back to work, quieter, humbler. On weekends, he helped me rebuild the dock, same way he had as a kid. We didn't talk much about Sabrina. Sometimes he'd just shake his head and say, I thought I was building a future. And I'd reply, you were. You just picked the wrong materials. One evening, Peter stopped by with the court's final notice. He laid it on the table without ceremony. Sentence came through, he said. 2 years with restitution. She'll be out sooner, but she'll never work under her name again. I nodded, tracing a finger along the paper's edge. 2 years doesn't seem much for the trouble she caused. Peter shrugged. Justice measures in proof, not pain. He left soon after. I stayed at the table a while, the house humming softly around me, the clock ticking, wind through the eaves, the faraway crash of waves. Then I did what I'd done every night since the first lie surfaced. I pressed play on Marion's recorder. Doug, her voice said, when the storm's gone, don't stare at the wreckage. Look at what's still standing. That's where life begins again. I smiled. Still giving orders, I muttered. Outside, Evan was stacking the last boards for tomorrow's work. I joined him. The tide had dropped enough to expose the pier's old foundation, beams still holding after 40 years of salt and storms. Funny thing, I said. I used to think we built this dock for boats. Turns out it's for lessons. Evan looked at me, puzzled. Lessons? Every board's a choice, I said. You pick the wrong one, the whole thing tilts. But if you build slow and honest, it'll outlast both of us. He smiled faintly. Guess I'm starting over from the first board then. That's the only way worth doing it. We worked until sunset, nails tapping in rhythm with the gulls crying above us. The sky turned gold, then amber, then blue. When we finished, we stood side by side, watching the water lap against the pilings. She's gone for good? He asked quietly. Gone where she can't reach us, I said. The rest's up to the tide. He nodded, and for the first time, I saw peace settle over his face. Later, when the stars came out, I sat on the porch, recorder in my hand, and whispered toward the sea. It's over, Marion. The wind shifted, not harsh this time, just enough to lift the curtain by the door, and in that gentle movement, the house seemed to breathe again. The sea went back to its old rhythm, and so did I. Days stopped carrying tension in their bellies. Mornings came with the smell of coffee and the sound of gulls instead of police calls or lawyers. Evenings belonged to the light spilling across the kitchen wall, the same light Marion once painted into every room. Evan stayed in the spare room for a while after the trial. He said it was just until things settle, but both of us knew it was something quieter than that. Coming home wasn't about shelter, it was about repair, the kind of repair that doesn't use tools. He'd rise early, stack lumber on the dock, and wait for me to join. We rarely spoke for the first hour. The work filled the silence. Nails, sawdust, the smell of cedar, it all had its own language. One morning he said, "I thought she was everything I wanted." I looked up from the beam I was planing. "What did you want, son?" He thought about it, then said, "Someone who looked at me like I was enough." I nodded. "That's not love, Evan. That's theater." He smiled faintly. "Guess I bought a ticket to the wrong show." By mid-afternoon, the tide came in and forced us to stop. We sat on the edge of the pier, legs swinging above the water. The surface mirrored the sky, clean and new, as if it hadn't seen what the last months had done to us. "You think it's wrong I still miss her?" Evan asked suddenly. "No," I said. "Missing someone isn't wrong. It's just proof you felt something real, even if they didn't." He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I keep hearing her voice, the way she'd laugh when she wanted to change the subject." "Then listen close," I said. "You'll hear where the truth stopped." He took that in quietly. We didn't need to say more. The wind said it for us, steady, unbroken. Peter dropped by that weekend with a bottle of bourbon and a grin. "Thought we should christen the new dock," he said. "It's finally legal, level, and liquor ready." We toasted with paper cups because Marion's glasses still sat in the cabinet untouched. "To clean endings," Peter said. "To honest beginnings," I added. Evan raised his cup. "To Mom, for building everything we're still standing on." The three of us clinked gently. The sound rang soft and pure. That night, after Peter left and Evan had gone to bed, I sat out on the porch with the recorder. I hadn't played it in a week. I didn't need to anymore, not to find direction. But I pressed play anyway, because sometimes you revisit the voice of someone gone just to prove they still fit in the room. "Doug," she said, "you can live inside grief, or you can let it teach you how to live outside it. Either way, keep the light on." The tape clicked off, and for once, I didn't rewind it. Some lessons only need to be heard once. The next morning, I walked through the house, each room holding a little less ache. Marion's paintbrushes still sat in a jar by the window, dust thick around them. I thought about cleaning them, but decided not to. Some relics aren't for polishing, they're for remembering. Evan joined me on the porch with 2 coffees. "I got a job offer," he said, "teaching mechanical drafting at the community college." "That's a good fit," I said. "You'll like shaping lines that hold weight." He smiled. "Guess I learned from you." "Then make sure you teach them what weight really means." We sat there watching the bay brighten under the morning sun. A small fishing boat crossed the water, its wake carving silver through the blue. "You ever think you'll sell this place, Dad?" he asked. I chuckled. "Sell a promise? Not likely." He nodded. "Thought you'd say that." The conversation drifted into quiet again. I liked that about us now. We didn't need words to understand each other anymore. The silence felt full instead of empty. Later that afternoon, we built a new bench at the end of the dock. Evan carved something into the underside before attaching the slat. I didn't ask what. It felt like one of those private offerings a man makes to his own regrets. When we were done, he said, "You think Mom would have forgiven me for falling for someone like her?" "She'd have hugged you first," I said, "and told you forgiveness isn't a one-way street. Then she'd have made you paint the railing to keep you humble." That earned a real laugh from him, deep, unguarded, almost boyish. It sounded like healing. That evening I took my boat out for the first time since everything happened. Just a short ride across the bay, engine low, air cool and clean. The dock lights glowed behind me, steady and warm. Halfway across, I cut the motor and let the boat drift. The water around me was glass, reflecting the sky so wide it made the heart ache. I thought of Marion, of Evan, of all the storms that come disguised as people, and I realized something. Peace doesn't return when the waves stop. It returns when you stop fighting the tide and start steering with it. The recorder sat in my pocket, silent now. It didn't need to speak anymore. The house had her voice, The wind had her laughter, and I still had the truth. I turned the boat toward home. There are moments when the house feels almost alive. Not haunted, not lonely, but aware. It knows who it shelters and who it doesn't. After everything, I started to see it differently. Not as walls and windows, but as the last conversation Marion and I never finished. Every corner had her handwriting in it. The kitchen tile she argued for, saying white would make mornings brighter. The uneven window frame in the study that she refused to fix because imperfection is what keeps a home humble. Even the front porch where she made me carve our initials into the railing before the varnish dried. For weeks, I'd avoided those small reminders. Now I walked through the house with open eyes, touching the things I used to overlook. Every piece of her work was still holding strong. Evan had gone back to teaching. The house was quiet again. I spent the days restoring Marion's garden. The weeds had claimed too much ground during the storm, literal and otherwise. I dug until my hands blistered, the smell of soil thick and sweet. While pulling a stubborn root near the fence, I unearthed a small tin box, rusted shut, forgotten. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, were photos, black and white, slightly damp. Marion, younger, laughing at something out of frame. On the back, in her handwriting, "If you ever forget why we built this place, dig deeper." I sat there for a long time, soil drying on my palms, looking at the photo until the blur in my eyes cleared. That night, I framed it and placed it above the fireplace. The house, it seemed, had waited for me to find it. Peter stopped by again on Sunday with news. "The state's closed the file. You're officially in the clear." "Feels strange hearing that," I said. "Closure always does," he replied. He looked around the living room, his eyes softening. "She built a good home here, Doug. You can feel it." "I didn't understand how much until I almost lost it," I said. "She made me believe wood and stone could remember love." Peter smiled. "They do. That's why this place stood when everything else didn't." He stayed for dinner, fish and potatoes, simple as it used to be when Marion hosted neighbors by the bay. We talked about old times, about the dock repairs, about Evan's new job. Nothing dramatic, just quiet living again. When he left, he said, "You know, not everyone gets to live inside their redemption." I watched his taillights vanish into the trees. Maybe he was right. Maybe this house wasn't just survival. It was the proof that honesty endures longer than deceit. Later that night, I walked to the dock, recorder in my coat pocket, though I hadn't pressed play in days. The moon hung low, turning the bay silver. Waves nudged the pier like old friends tapping to remind me they were still here. I remembered the first day Marion and I stood on this same dock. 38 years ago, she'd said, "If we build this right, it'll outlast us." It had. I looked toward the house, its windows glowing softly in the dark. The paint might have chipped, the shingles might have aged, but the soul she'd woven into it was stronger than time. I finally said it out loud, to the water, to her, to whoever was listening. "You built more than a house, Marion. You built me." The wind shifted, carrying her scent, that faint mix of salt and lavender I used to wake up to. And for a brief moment, I could almost hear her laugh again. Light, free, unburdened. When I returned inside, I didn't turn on the lights. The photo above the fireplace glowed faintly in the moonlight, her smile unchanged. I whispered, "You won, love. The truth still stands?" And it did. Every beam, every nail, every promise. By the time autumn came, the air had changed again. The sharpness of summer softened, and the ocean settled into that slow rhythm I'd grown old beside. Everything looked washed clean, the sky, the house, even the heartache. Some evenings I'd walk down to the end of the dock and just stand there until the last light dissolved. The bay always looked different at dusk, the water glassy, the gulls gone quiet, the whole horizon bleeding gold into gray. I used to think life worked like the sea. Storms came, you held fast, and when they passed, you went back to normal. But I was wrong. Storms change not the shoreline. They take pieces with them. What's left isn't what it was, but sometimes it's stronger for it. Evan had moved into a small place of his own again, a modest apartment overlooking the water. He came by every weekend, usually with groceries and a story from class. The boy who once thought love meant ownership now talked about balance, patience, and honesty. I didn't have to say I was proud. He already knew. We worked quietly that Saturday morning, repairing the last section of the fence. When we finished, he leaned against the post, eyes distant. "You ever think you'll marry again?" he asked suddenly. I smiled. "At my age, son, I'm married to the weather and the wood." He laughed. "I meant it. You deserve company." "I have it," I said. "Yours and hers." I tapped my chest lightly. "She's still around, just rearranged." He didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "I get that now." After he left, I stayed outside long past sunset. The house behind me hummed. Wind through the shutters, the faint groan of old wood, familiar music. I took the recorder from my coat pocket, the same one that had carried Marion's voice through every storm. I turned it over in my hands, its casing worn smooth from years of use. For a while I debated pressing play, but instead I opened the back panel and removed the tape. I held it up to the light, thin, fragile, full of memories. "I think we're good now, love," I whispered. Then I walked to the edge of the dock and let it go. The cassette floated for a moment, catching the reflection of the fading sun before the tide took it. Some goodbyes don't need words. When I went back inside, the house felt lighter, as though it had been waiting for me to let her rest. On the mantel, the photo I'd framed looked different in the low light. Marion's smile seemed almost alive, her eyes following me the way they always had when she thought I was overthinking. I poured myself a small drink, sat in her favorite chair, and watched the sky darken through the window. You reach a point in life where revenge, loss, justice, they all blur into something quieter. What matters isn't what you've done to others, or what they've done to you. It's what you've chosen to keep sacred after the dust settles. For me, it was this house, the life inside it, the memory of love built right. Later, as the first stars blinked out over the horizon, I walked outside once more. The dock stretched ahead like a promise. The sea was calm, the kind of calm you don't trust until you realize it's earned. I said softly, "Marion, it's still standing. Every nail, every truth. You did it." A faint gust came off the water, cool, gentle, and certain, brushing past me like a hand on the shoulder. I smiled. "Yeah, I know," I said. "It's time." Then I turned, closed the porch light behind me, and let the night take over.